For the last few months, I've been mulling the Marvel Cinematic Universe, well before Avengers Endgame came out, but in anticipation of Endgame. And right before, I guess it was Infinity War, I went back and started picking up a lot of the movies that I didn't already own and revisiting a lot of the films that I had previously not watched very much. My favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe movies are, of course, as I've said before, the Captain America films and the original Iron Man. I actually really like the Ant-Man films as well. I really like Paul Rudd and Evangeline Lilly. But I have an unpopular opinion that I'm willing to confess at this point. I was almost turned away from the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe at the time because I was not thrilled with the original Avengers. I felt the movie lacked a substantive plot. I felt it was really a paper thin story, and I wasn't impressed. And I almost didn't come back until my friend Keith told me, "You've got to see Winter Soldier. You've got to see it." And I'm sure I've probably told this story before, but I went and saw Winter Soldier, and it brought me back in to the cinematic universe. That being said, I also confess that when I saw the next Avengers movie, Age of Ultron, I was not impressed at that time, as I had been with Avengers. However, in the ramp up to Infinity War, I rewatched a number of these movies. And I gotta say, for whatever reason, I don't know what it was at the time that spurred all this, but I watched the original Avengers, and because of the goodwill and camaraderie those actors had brought into the subsequent films in the series, Avengers, it's offending moments for me, and I say that with my tongue firmly in my cheek. I don't mean actual offense, but the moments in that movie that I didn't like, the things about that movie that I didn't like, were muted a little bit in the background because I had grown to love the actors who played these characters. But when I got to Age of Ultron, I was dreading it because I thought this movie is going to just, oh, what a slog it's going to be. And I really found myself enjoying it. I mean, really enjoying it, to the point that I've probably watched it since then 2 or 3 more times. And I don't know why I missed all that. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, and I don't want to ramble, so I'm just going to jump right to the point. Everything that happens in the Marvel Cinematic Universe after that, in a major way, is all informed by Age of Ultron. Age of Ultron is where the Marvel Cinematic Universe really gets going and the seeds really get planted for the final confrontation with Thanos. Now, to some of you out there, you might be saying, well, Michael, duh. But this was a real revelation to me upon watching it. And this was prior to Infinity War coming out. It was prior to Endgame coming out. I had not seen either of those. And I'm watching this thing, and just from what happened in Civil War, just from what happened in some of the later movies, Black Panther, I'm like, wow, this movie is really setting up all the chess pieces. More so than Avengers. Avengers was really just another origin story. It was, all those other movies were origin stories, which were fine, but then this one was like, oh, and let's show you how the Avengers all get together. And because Infinity War and Endgame are the end of that cycle, Age of Ultron is really the only movie within the MCU that's an Avengers movie that actually could be seen as a standalone Avengers adventure, where everybody's already established, you jump right into it, they solve the threat of the week, or the threat of that issue, the threat of the month, and they move on. And that makes it really enjoyable. But it sets up all of these amazing things that pay off later that Avengers really doesn't. I mean, yeah, you got the Chiari or whatever those things are called, the space things. I mean, yeah, and you've got the beginnings of Iron Man wigging out, but that really doesn't come to fruition until Age of Ultron. Age of Ultron sets up the entire idea of why Tony Stark becomes so establishment in Civil War. He just wants to protect not only himself but everybody. He doesn't want to see anybody sacrificed for the struggle of overcoming a challenge. That's his failing, is that he wants Ultron to protect the world. You've got the setup of seeing Hawkeye and his family for the first time, and learning how invested he is in his family, and how that becomes such an important component of his character arc in Endgame. Because without that, and without that being as well done as it was, we wouldn't have seen all of that in Endgame. You have the beginnings of really Thor's neuroses. When Wanda gives him the vision, I don't mean the vision, but when Wanda messes with his head, you see him in his hallucination being told that he's going to bring ruin to Asgard, which is Ragnarok. I mean, he himself doesn't do it, but he's being given a premonition that he will be the king of Asgard, the ruler of Asgard, when it falls, which freaks him out to no end. You've got the whole thing with Captain America, and in his hallucination, he's trying to finally, get that dance with Peggy. And I know that was sort of talked about in First Avenger, but that's his greatest yearning, his greatest fear, his greatest hang-up, is that he's a man out of time. He's never going to be happy where he is. All he wants to do is be back in the 1940s with Peggy Carter. And all of that is gonna come around. And then, of course, whether intentional or not, and somebody just got really clever, you have the whole moment at the party in the beginning where Captain America shifts Mjolnir during the after party, where they're all trying to lift Thor's hammer. And Thor gets a little, wait a minute. All of those things, plus, Tony having his WandaVision, as we'll call it, his Wanda moment where he sees all of his friends, dying or dead, and they're saying, why didn't you do more? Why didn't you help? All of that is setting up Tony for the ultimate sacrifice, because he's trying to protect everyone, but also protect himself. But he's going to learn by the end of the MCU Phase 3 or whatever it is, that the only way he can ensure that all of that happens is by also putting himself in the way of all of it. Sometimes, it's like the Kobayashi Maru. Sometimes there isn't a way to win and save everybody. It's the classic Kirk thing from Star Trek II. And it's really, really well done. I don't have a problem. It sets up Wanda's introduction into the series. It sets up Vision's introduction into the series. Those are all huge, huge chess pieces on the MCU game board. And I'm not sure, looking at it, in retrospect now with Endgame being out, I'm not sure how much of that was pre-planned by Kevin Feige and all the people at Marvel, and how much of it was smartly derived from Ultron as other writers went through it. I know that Captain America and most of the later Avengers films had the same writers, the same writing team, which is really smart. But were they mining it, or were they planting seeds? You actually have Tony Stark in the beginning of the film, when they are arguing with him about why he created Ultron. You actually have him reference the fight in New York in the first Avengers movie, and then he points up to the ceiling and talks about how 300 miles above our head, or whatever he said, is the portal that opened up, and all hell broke loose. And then he says the line, up there is the end game. He actually says The Endgame. Was the title for that movie already pre-planned? I don't know. I'm not an MCU scholar. But what I do know is that Ultron gets a bad rap. Age of Ultron does get a bad rap. It is the least liked Avengers movie by and large, for reasons that include Ultron being kind of a funny, Whedon-y kind of dialogued character. When I saw it the first time, yeah, that bothered me. Not in a major way, but I was annoyed. I was annoyed with the whole Joss Whedon thing. I felt like it had been played out. But in retrospect, going back and watching it with fresh eyes, prior to Endgame, Ultron is a breath of fresh air as a villain. He is... I know everybody was fresh off Loki, and I guess everybody just missed, Tom Hiddleston. I get it. But by that point, especially after the Hulk moment at the end of Avengers 1, Loki had become a joke. And Loki continues to kind of be a joke throughout the rest of the MCU. It's always turnabout. He's going to do something, and then Thor's going to get the upper hand, and then Loki's going to feel like a fool. And then especially in Ragnarok, which was mostly a comedy, that all happens. Whereas Ultron, on the other hand, he was really one of the more developed villains in the MCU up until that point. I would argue that Ultron, Thanos, and Killmonger are probably the most developed villains. I'm not arguing the point as to whether or not their development is perfect or their motivations are perfect. I'm simply saying they're not just some big faceless bat or some energy cube or some black hat villain. I mean, these characters have motivations and personalities, and they come through. And Loki does too, but Loki had more of a personality in the beginning, and then he kind of becomes a punchline as the series goes on. I actually like Ultron now that I've seen the movie a few times. I actually really do like Ultron as a character. And I like the way he's characterized. I like his dialogue. I like the way he has incorporated, Tony Stark's way of thinking and personality because he's imbued by it. So he's got it in his digital DNA. So all of that makes sense. Yes, I know that they stole that origin from Ant-Man. Ultron was supposed to have been created by Ant-Man. Could they have worked that out and had Ant-Man show up earlier in the MCU? Probably, but we have to take the MCU as it is. For better or worse, we have to take the MCU as it played out in front of us. It's like Ultimates. It's a different continuity. It's a different way of telling the Marvel story, the Marvel mythos. And if I had anything negative to say about Age of Ultron, having reviewed it a few times, I'm simply going to say that yes, some of the special effects in the beginning battle are a little dodgy. The whole way that Vision is created is a little strange. It's a little convenient. Thor having a vision, and he does have a vision of the stones, and then he goes on a vision quest after that, and I thought that tracked just fine. Little convenient that the pool he needed to be in was on Earth, and then also that he comes down and shocks the android with lightning, and the android becomes Vision Jarvis. I mean, that's a little, we've painted the plot into a corner and let's run through the wet paint and hope they don't see the footprints as Steven Spielberg has described. But you had to get Vision into the story. Vision's a good way in. I'm sure if I watched it a few more times or listened a little bit more carefully or whatever, I could maybe discern more about how that happened. But the movie builds to an effective crescendo. Yes, the villain is... The thing I like about it is that the villain isn't immediately wanting to wipe out all of humanity. He does say to Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, that he wants to give them a chance, but first he's got to slap them down, humanity. I liked that shift. You know, it's not I'm jumping to the conclusion, but then when everybody makes life difficult for him, he's just going to do that anyway, because you have to have that as the final plot challenge. And I get that. I'm not trying to forgive the film for it. It is a cliche, but this is a comic book movie. I didn't have an issue with that. I love the action sequences in the movie. I think they're some of the best action sequences choreographed in all of the Avengers films. Whether it's that awesome truck chase where Captain America and Black Widow are chasing down Ultron in that big rig. I thought that was great. And a far cry better than everything that we saw in the very, very beginning of the movie. I also really loved the fight between Hulk and Iron Man. As gratuitously CGI as it is, it's very, very good. And we finally get to see Hulk both integrated with the team and the dangers of having Hulk integrated with the team. Hulk was largely avoided in the Avengers Part 1. And I get why, because it's an origin story of how the team came together, and he's trying to avoid being the Hulk. But then there's that cheat at the very end where he's like, oh, I'm always angry. I've always got this in control-ish. It's like, wait, but I thought you didn't have it in control. I thought that was the whole point. Ultron, Age of Ultron fixes that a little bit. And I like the way they fixed it. I know there was the controversy about him and Black Widow having a romance. That doesn't really bother me. Again, it's the MCU, not the Marvel Comics. You have to make some adjustments for the sake of this 2.5 hour experience. But I really, really enjoyed this movie upon revisiting. Upon reconsideration, I've really come to love Age of Ultron. And whether this opinion is controversial or not, I think it's the best Avengers movie. As far as a cohesive experience that attempts to have depth and attempts to have a real story with new characters brought in who are also developed, and great action sequences that are motivated by the plot. Yeah, I think Age of Ultron is a vastly underrated installment in the MCU. And I think time is going to be kinder to it as it goes on. I hope it is anyway. I don't know why I wanted to talk about this, but I guess it's because I've been thinking about this whole Avengers Endgame thing, and I've been seeing the criticism online about Endgame, and I understand why some people had some problems with it. I'm not about to go into a review of Endgame. But both Infinity War and Endgame are incomplete experiences without each other. Age of Ultron stands alone. It stands alone. And at the very end of it, you have the Avengers facility, you have Falcon, War Machine, Wanda, Vision, Black Widow, and Captain America all together at the end. I mean, it's really well done. And I don't know, and I'm guilty of it too. I don't know why it rubbed me the wrong way when I saw it the first time. And a lot of people were like, about it, but it's really strong. And maybe it was just, maybe we as the audience had to catch up with it. Maybe we have to catch up with it. So if you haven't watched Age of Ultron in a while, I'd ask that you give it another shot. I'm not asking you to agree with me. It's just my opinion, but give it another shot. See what you think. I really have grown to love that movie, and it's got a lot of great stuff going on. A lot of good humor, a lot of great pacing, good set changes and scenery changes, moments. Captain America standing there seeing Hawkeye with his family, and there's these reaction moments that are kind of telling, about where his head is. He's got to walk out of that house at one point. He's missing Peggy. He's missing his own reality, or his own world. Thor being wigged out by you know, what occurred a few scenes before. Iron Man and Captain America having that confrontation, you know, chopping wood. I mean, Age of Ultron doesn't just set up Endgame and Infinity War. It also sets up Civil War. But it's also the one movie where you don't have to watch the Avengers get together, and you also don't have to watch them immediately break up. It is the one movie that is an Avengers comic. And I think it does it remarkably well. Remarkably well. So I'm going to shut up now, because otherwise I'll just keep talking. But give it another watch if you've you know, had your doubts about it. Give it another watch. I had my doubts, and especially now with Infinity War and Endgame informing it, I think you're really going to enjoy it a lot more than you did. So, thanks for watching this. We'll see you on the next video.
And for gosh sake, watch your language.
That's not going away anytime soon.